Alright, hello again everybody. Today I wanted to do a longer video where I just go over all my decks here that I have, like most of the builds, and just a lot of these are decks I've profiled on the channel before or talked about in tournament reports, but I just wanted to kind of go through my actual physical decks and just do a brief little profile slash update on all of them and show you what my current lists are for these decks. I have a few more decks in this, but or that are sleeved up, but these are kind of some of the main decks that I have that I like, and I like where most of the builds are at right now. So I figured I'd just go through and show them off one by one and just do a quick little recap, revisit on most of these. All right, so the first deck to go over is Lightwater Cetus, which is the last deck I profiled on my channel. But obviously the list here pretty simple. Just you got the blockers, birds, Cetus, and some dragons, and then you just kind of functions as like a good little aggro tempo deck that also has some really good defensive capabilities and survivability with all the blockers and the Cetus. And you can loop Cetus and just draw stuff with Nyx. Calorth is a good threat. Lyra's great, just tempo mid-range card. And then I have like a suite of one-ups here. I did recently test a lot with just triple Magris, and I think I I don't think you need the three Magris. I think two Magris is fine. I think one Magris is fine. Three might be a little bit too much. I missed having stuff like Blinder Beetle as like a just an interactive one of. So I've kind of moved back to that, and then right now I'm trying the one Ironwood tree, which this list is actually what Claude used in one of the recent tournaments when we were kind of talking about the deck. And I tested in that tournament the three Magris and I ended up winning, but I do kind of feel like this configuration is maybe slightly better. Yeah, I just like having the interaction. And then Ironwood Tree is a good card too, just a good 2-drop that insulates you from stuff like Mesmerize. Just adds another blocker. It could be Lurg, it could just be, or like Chasm Entangler, it could just be another Magris. But I like the Ironwood Tree just because it gives you one more thing that kind of plays well with Blinder Beetle. Um, just lets you get over most of your opponent's like 2-drops and stuff, especially when you're on the play. Just having the Ironwood Tree, or even the draw too, just great against other bird decks and stuff. And then the problem with this deck is Blinder Beetle on curve is not the best just because your size isn't that great. Like it's scamps. Magris obviously doesn't attack over everything. It's mainly just if you have the Cranky on 2 that you can actually play with the Blinder Beetle on 3. So having an extra 2-drop that kind of plays well with the Blinder Beetle in some hands is pretty good. Obviously Lux works when you're on the draw against like a Nyx, for example. So there's different things that work, but just having a little bit more size on your 2-drops with Ironwood Trees is pretty nice for the Blinder Beetle. And then against Mesmerize, like I mentioned, it's just nice to kind of protect against that and protect your Nyx. And it works better in this deck than other aggro decks where you have the Cetus to convert into something a little more meaningful down the line, whereas Ironwood Tree and other aggressive decks is a little more suspect and maybe not worth playing because against Mesmerize, I mean, it's good to protect certain cards, but the problem is you're sort of pseudo discarding a card out of your hand on your own accord. Like the Ironwood Tree is kind of like discarding a card because it doesn't actually do much beyond just like mitigating the discard, right? As just a blocker, it's kind of a non-threatening creature. It's not really a real card in the battle zone as far as like, yeah, it's sort of like virtually not really a card. It's you're just sort of discarding something to prevent their discard from having effect. So it kind of but the problem with that is they can just charge their discard cards. So you're sort of discarding a card from your hand to change the target of their Mesmerize, but then they don't actually have to use their Mesmerize. They can just charge it. So you're sort of going down a card without them having to spend any resources just to change the target of their discard into the Ironwood Tree. So it's not the most impactful thing if you don't have super critical pieces to discard. And then if you're on top of that, if you're more of like a mid-rangey deck that's trying to curve out and you don't have a lot of forms of card advantage, it's a bit counterproductive to spend a resource on this like blocker if you don't have ways to convert it down the line. So in this deck, having the conversion, obviously it's still a good card. Like it's fine in those decks because you do have key cards that you want to protect from discard, like Broodmothers or Keeper of Laws and other sorts of decks. And so it's generally fine enough. And then on top of that, it hedges towards aggro by having a little chump blocker as well. So it's obviously a pretty solid card. And then in this deck, it's particularly strong because you don't have most of the weaknesses. of committing a card to this Ironwood tree that may or may not have an impact on their plays, and then if it doesn't, even if it doesn't, worst case, then you can just evolve on it. So I like where the list is at right now. I think it's just a pretty good, solid, consistent deck. I've experimented as well recently with some other Cetus decks that I might show in this video, and those ones have some problems, whereas this deck, just being a tight, kind of aggressive deck with other resilient threats like Keeper and Cyber Scamp, Calorth, they just kind of give you that high floor where at the end of the day you can just be a good aggro deck that can beat people down and kind of get under the big problematic aspects of a matchup and just sort of sneak wins out even when they might have the tools to otherwise beat you. So pretty good deck. Alright, so the next deck we have is one of my favorites, one of my pet decks, which is Water Dark Fire Nature Control. I profiled this deck a long time ago when I first made it, and I played it in a few tournaments, had some decent success with it. But yeah, it's one of my favorites, but I originally made it as sort of a ban list type environment deck where you're ignoring stuff like Keeper of Laws and Eternal Haven. That said, this deck can actually beat Eternal Haven decks. In some of the online tournaments, I played like one Blaze Helix. But Eternal Haven, I mean, if their lists are kind of clunky and bad, or if they are just like the linear varieties, like 3 saves, particularly ones that 2 or 3 saves without darkness for the most part, like if they have discard, it can be pretty rough. But if they're like these more linear Haven decks, you can actually beat them just by having a more consistent, interactive, I don't know, just the deck is really good for what it is, I think, in terms of how it's built. Just very proactive with like the 9 ramp. Mana Storm's crazy. You have Sprite's Gift, which is awesome in this deck, just to like, you ramp a ton, you have a ton of mana, and you just kind of get your stuff back from there. And it's just this sort of 1 mana crystal memory in a lot of games where you just have all these different pieces. I used to play like 1 Heal of Flame as like an extra creature type threat card. There was also like a removal tool for dealing with stuff like Torhelms or Keeper of Laws that are attacking you. I cut that for like the 3rd Incineration, but definitely playable. There's a lot of options. You could play the Helix, like I said, but I think it's not really doing enough, I think, unless they're like a really lean Haven decks where you can just have like a guaranteed answer for a Haven, or maybe, I mean, if they know you have it, they probably don't commit to and don't really need to commit to Havens to the board, but I don't know. There's ways you can cheese Haven decks with like your 1 Squillis and your 1 Abso Dark to get through, but for the most part, those matchups are a little too tough. But yeah, it's just huge removal suite, a lot of cheap spells and interaction, and then it just plays like a card advantage game, and then you get out Awaken, and mostly that's your win condition against a lot of decks. Matchups where Awakened isn't like hard locking them are the hard ones for the most part, like those Haven decks where their top end is better, and Tritonus can just be Terra Pitted and then draws a ton of cards, but all your cards are just these cheap interactive spells which don't answer Haven, so that's kind of the problem. But again, just a very solid, consistent deck. That's one of the better performing decks in my kind of internal testing gauntlet. That said, it is biased towards like a lot of matchups where Awaken is pretty strong, and they're right. So if your environment is like a more real meta game where there is like a larger focus on Haven decks, then this deck is not really viable. But if you can like pick your spots with it and then play the right matchups, it's actually pretty strong deck. But yeah, there's lots of different ways to tune it. The mana base is a bit sketchy, but it's kind of hard when the multi-sieves aren't too good, and I'd rather have like good untapped mana. But I don't know, I've talked a lot more in depth about the options and stuff in a more dedicated deck profile. I haven't changed it too much since then, but deck is still one of my favorites to play with, and one of my favorite decks I built in my time dabbling in Kaijudo recently. But yeah, that's it. Alright, so here we got my Water Nature Aggro deck, which is another deck that I built within the last few years, and another one of my favorite pet decks. Obviously, I got it assigned by a bunch of people I met at Mega Meet as well. And yeah, just one of my favorite decks. I think I profiled this build almost card for card. I think the only changes I made are just the Pricklebacks and Savage Spawn, which I've had in the deck for quite a while now. Which I think the initial build had like the Pineapples and Manapod Beetles, and I was kind of on that train of these creatures that dies to go to mana, but eventually I kind of ran into just, I don't know, it's a bit of a liability when all your cards are 1,000 powers. You can kind of get exploited in some aspects. And I didn't like that, so I wanted the bigger size with Savage Spawn and Prickleback. And these cards are also cards that just give you more proactive ways of getting to 5 mana on turn 4. Like Savage Spawn, you win a clash, it's actually kind of insane. This is just a really, really strong card. Even though your curve is low, your odds aren't that bad to spike a mana, and it's just insane. Prickleback as well. I don't know. It feels awkward to play because you like waste mana sometimes, or you don't attack with it on turn 2 or something, and it just feels like weird. But it's actually not bad. It's just insane. It opens up different curve lines with many tribes and hatchery, and just again more avenues to 5 mana on turn 4 for these cards. I'm still pretty attached to just having the full 6 of these. Maybe you could shave one, but it's just so important you have them against like discard decks, and they're just keep your top decks live when people are able to discard you or trade resources. It's just so important. Sometimes you can run into issues of like not drawing enough early game, and then you're just starting the game on like turn 4 or 5, but that's really rare. There's an argument to like make space for. I think a card like Violet Puffer could be really good because it's just another card that individually gets you to 5 on turn 4. It's basically just another copy of Toadstool. So that's a card I've been considering. I don't think you need to play a lot of them, but just one could like unbrick some of your bad hands, which is an option. That's something I've considered. There's other stuff like more Shield Blast is the other big contention. Just playing stuff like Cryonucleus or Root Trap. The problem is Root Trap there's not space for unless you're just probably directly swapping them for Artichokes, so you could make that call. Maybe it's cope to try to play Root Trap to out Infernus the Awakened, because if it's coming down early, it depends. Like usually you're kind of just dead if they drop it, and you're not like just winning on board, so you kind of just take the stance of like I'm just gonna be the aggro deck and just get under it. But if they do drop it off like a Herald combo, usually they can just like turn the corner right away. Or if not, maybe they're banking on you not having follow-up, and then I don't know, it's kind of awkward, right? I think Root Trap sometimes can get you there against the control decks. Like if they're dropping Awakened and it's on an empty board again, you're probably just losing. I don't know how many games Root Trap is really saving you in those scenarios, because if it's an empty board, presumably they've already kind of ground you out of resources, and you may just be sitting with dead Root Traps in hand anyways, and then you get a target, but then you have to also come back in that game, and maybe that's only something that works if you're like both top deck. I don't know. It's just hard to see how often Root Trap really wins you games. Obviously, it's some number more than Artichoke does in those scenarios, so it is a way to hedge against those things, and maybe that's worth it. Artichoke is just so good in like these aggro mirrors, and getting rushed down by other aggro decks is one of the problems with this deck. That said, this deck can have a bad matchup against like other like these really low curve tempo decks like Mono Light, Mono Dark, Cetus. Actually not the Cetus decks. I think this deck's actually decent against Cetus, but yeah, those kind of decks can be a problem. Maybe Artichoke is better there than Root Trap, so that's kind of the idea, but I think Root Trap could go in. Obviously, the other idea is just being 40 creatures with Broodmother. You always drawing 2 cards, which is nice. And then Artichoke also high rolls early and then helps you proc many tribes, which is pretty nice. It's bait for these guys when it comes out of shields as well, so those are sort of the benefits, but I could see Root Trap being better. And then Cryonucleus, you could shave on Rusalkas. I just love having 6 Rusalkas because they're so insane to draw into, and just double plays like on 6 mana, even with Hatchery out, you can just drop 2 Rusalkas. Like these cards are just absurd. But I could see needing to play like 1 or 2 more Shield Blasts with Cryonucleus, but Nucleus itself is just such a mediocre, even Shield Blast. Like I'm just not really attached to that card. And then there's Boulder Fist, which I'm still loving as a 1-of. I don't really feel like it's cuttable just because it's like a 1 card. It's always been like a 1 card game plan. It's just an insane card. Really like it, and it's just so good to draw, and then you can just, yeah, it just wins the games. It's even an argument for playing like 2 of them is viable. I just think, again, space issues, and you can't really cut too many water cards. Maybe you could get away with cutting 1, but you just really don't want to, because sure, you have enough sources but you kind of want like your 4s on turn 3 sometimes, because you have Toadstool, or you're ramping on turn 4. Like you need your water sources early, and I don't know, it's just, if they discard 1, I don't know, it's just awkward. So you want to make sure that you have a bunch of water mana, because those water cards can be really, really crucial in a lot of spots. So I don't know, more Shield Blast, switching up to Root Traps, those are options. More Boulder Fist is an option. Maybe a little bit more, one more early game card with like a Violet Puffer could be an option as well. And if you're making room for those, obviously you might have to shave like Rusalkas, maybe one of these 5-drops, maybe Boulder Fizz, I don't know. But overall, the deck's been really good for me. One of my favorite decks. Another one of the best performing in my kind of testing gauntlets and stuff. Just a really, really fun, solid, good deck. But yeah, that's Water Nature Aggro. So here we have my Mono Light build. I think this is another deck where I profiled it a long time ago on the channel. Went in a little bit more in depth there if you want to see that. But this build, I think I won a tournament as well online with this. I think it was just like a 3-round Swiss thing though, so not the biggest deal. But I did play, I think, pretty much this exact list. But yeah, I'm pretty sold on this. I've had this particular configuration built for a while, but yeah, it's more of a, I guess, tempo deck than anything else. I know people like to call Monolight a rush deck, and I guess more of the alternative builds are effectively rush decks. But I think it's just more of a tempo deck where you have like your aggro control-y type elements. Like you have a very low curve, low mana cost, and then you play a bunch of big tempo effects like the Shield Blast, and then you also have a lot of like cheap defensive stuff with the chasms and blockers, and you can play a more controlling game and slow the pace down and take and kind of just like clear your opponent's boards with removal effects like the tap effects basically. So I think it's just a kind of quintessential tempo deck in that aspect, and it is just pretty consistent, pretty solid, and generally favored against a lot of other aggressive decks. The one issue is that you can get outsized. I think like your big effects being creatures that are just 6,000 power is kind of a liability, but the reality is you just play the matchups differently, and you just leverage the fact that you have an insane amount of shield blasts, and you can use cheap blockers like chasms to protect your evolutions. I've tried some alternate builds of this deck as well with I kind of forget what it's called, maybe Shock Sentinel. I don't know if that's right. Like there's like a 3 mana 2500 that when you play an evolution you can tap something. So I've tried builds with that and Nova Cruisers and more of the 4-drops evolutions, and just trying to curve with that. And those lists are fine as well. More 1-drops as well. But I think this build I've been pretty solid and pretty sold on for a while. I just high 2-drop count. Only the Blinder Beetles is 3-drops. I figured that the 2-drops are just more consistent. You want to play a bunch of those. Double spell on turn 4 sometimes. I've tried other stuff like the guy that taps. You call a level and it taps everything of that level. I just don't find those Shakana style cards to be actually that good. They have some matchups where they're pretty decent, but for the most part, I feel like those cards are kind of weak. You could also play, I think, the promo Sparkblade Protector, I think. You could play that instead of the Dreadnought. I think this is something I talked about in the past as well. Both have their upsides. This one has more creatures that can evolve on with Saurus and Reckoner, Keeper of Laws initially, but so that comes up sometimes. Whereas Sparkblade has, some effects that come up sometimes. I think both are good. You could play both interchangeably. I think sometimes not being able to evolve will cost you games. Sometimes not having the effects of a Sparkblade will cost you games. In my testing for a lot of it, they're effectively the same card, and then I think it was like I played like 100 games at one point, and like this card cost me 1 game where Sparkblade cost me 2 games. So it was like they're effectively the same thing. So but yeah, then you have like the high shield blast count. This is one of the things up for debate. There's maybe too much. It's a bit bricky sometimes, which is a thing. But I've cut Salvation Reckoner sometimes for the 3-drop guy. You could maybe play another 2-drop or maybe even a 1-drop or something. You could play another evolution. You don't need to play full 9, but I just felt like having that insane amount of shield blast just, I don't know, it gives you a lot of reach. It just makes it so your opponent can't race you a lot of the time. It just cuts off a lot of their counter game plans. Now, obviously, like, you do just take some free L's by just breaking and drawing way too much of this stuff. But even then, like, when the game plays out slower, having Reckoner is a pretty good 5-drop option to pair with some stuff. I don't know. The cards are just good. It might be a little bit too heavy, but I don't know. There's not many great cards. I think another thing I tested, though, was there was like the 3 mana 1500 Enforcer that has Shield Blast. That was an option too, to just have some more like cheap stuff that you can play that also is a Shield Blast. So that's an option. There's a lot of cards you could play, but I don't know. I'm pretty happy with where the list is at right now. I don't know. You could swap the Dreadnought for like a bigger evolution. like Halon even just being 8,000 power, or the Dorzim is an option as well, just has a bit of an effect and gets over 6,000 power stuff. So those are definitely options for the deck, but for the most part I think the deck has been pretty good so far. So I don't know, again, one of the better performing decks, but mostly because it just counters a lot of other small aggressive tempo-y type decks or rush decks. So I don't know, my testing gauntlet is a little, again, it's a little biased in that direction, so maybe, but then it's also pretty solid. It ends up just being actually not that bad against a lot of the, like the good stuff. It's not that bad against dragons. It's not that bad against certain kinds of Haven decks, like the older school kind of piley control decks. Like this deck's not that bad against. It's just more mid-rangey stuff this deck can struggle with, and then decks like the Lightwater Dark Cetus, which are just these kind of tempo aggro decks with just bigger creatures and the same kind of defensive sort of capabilities. So those matchups are the hardest. But against like stuff like Mono Nature or Water Nature, or even other decks like the Rush decks, any fire decks, this deck is quite strong against. But it is kind of like a meta deck where I think it's a bit better depending on if you're playing against good decks and good aggressive decks, but then worse if you're playing against kind of mediocre mid-range decks that generally probably shouldn't exist in a metagame with like Dragons and Haven. But yeah, this deck ends up being pretty solid overall. All right, so the next deck is Mono Dark Aggro or Rush, whatever you want to call it. Another one of these like low curve sort of tempo decks though. It's a similar recipe that I have with a lot of these decks, like the Cetus deck, Monolight, and this deck as well. It's just low curve, a lot of cheap stuff, and then interactive board-based removal effects, and then the ability to go fast or slow the game down and have some defensive plays, but you're not trying to take over defensively and like win with inevitability. It's more like you're trying to just take over and buy some time to set up like a lethal or some kind of push. But yeah, it's like positionally capable defensive decks with also just these like aggressive game plans to lean on in other matchups where those positions won't work or when you don't have the cards to do that. So yeah, just low curve, maxing out one drops, just Marrow Ooze and Skeleton Soldier just let you kind of protect some of your bigger stuff that's important. Gigabolver, it's just these attackers that die, it's not the best, but obviously they synergize great with Scavenging Chimera, getting to recycle those cards. Forsaken Puppet, insane on turn one. Time Loss, just a great card, attacks and deals you damage, and then you have these blockers to kind of mitigate that. Gloom Hollow, a good offensive card, good in a lot of other aggressive mirrors. Locomotivator, I didn't have this in like my first builds. I think I played it as like a one-of because I was hesitant to use the full 3, but eventually I realized you just got to play. I mean, it draws a card effectively when it enters. Screeching, awesome in aggro mirrors, good against skirmish blockers, which are a problem, like just dealing with Strider or Raincloud or anything like that. Attic Reaper looks bad, but on the play, especially in aggro matchups, it's just very good. Just kills stuff, advances your board, and it works great in sequences with like one drop into Scavenging into Attic Reaper. You can unleash the one drop, then pick up the one drop with Scavenging. It's just great card. The Phantasm, very mediocre card, but it just gives you a vortex to convert some of these useless bodies in play sometimes and just be a kind of big bursty damage sometimes, and then the unleash effect sometimes relevant. It's kind of a mediocre card. If we had like a Sunstorm Dreadnought in Darkness, would appreciate that, but unfortunately we don't. And then I'm playing Gloom Hollow Taskmaster. This was another Evo that I was playing, I think one of, then two of, and eventually I realized you just got to play 3 because it's just the double breaker that evolves on anything, and then just it has a bit of grind potential. Super nichely, if you have 2 of these in rotation, you can just kind of loop each other, but rarely comes up. But it can be annoying for your opponent sometimes. So there's a bit of an recursive card advantage, which is one of the strengths of this deck compared to Monolight, for example, which has Keeper for some, a bit of sustain maybe. But this deck, you have a lot more kind of advantage with Locomotivator, Scavenging, Time Lost, Gloom Hollow. You do draw a lot of cards. That said, your stuff is very small and you kind of get bricked walled by skirmish blockers, which is a problem, especially when your interaction is like these individual one-off 4-mana effects. Attic Reaper, unfortunately, like unlike Torholm, does not attack through these skirmish blockers very often and doesn't directly answer them. So yeah, the deck can feel underpowered at times, but it also just has like a really low curve and it's just sneaky very good. Joko, it was Terror Pit at some point. I mean, another thing to consider is like an Awakened out, but again, kind of cope most of the time, even especially because unlike Root Trap, Awaken can be protected from a Terror Pit anyways via something like Lux. So yeah, I like Joko for the high roll more so with Time Loss, gives you a little more optionality there. But this card, I don't know, it's been pretty good for me. Just having that a little more Shield Blast. You could overload on Shield Blast to build more around Time Loss Phantom, but I think it's a little bit counterproductive, especially after I put Local Motivators in the deck. Just because like Local Motivator, I mean, if you're building to like make compromises to like your draw consistency to kind of have these more high roll big shield blast effects with time loss, but now all of a sudden you're drawing those cards out of your shield zone, that's not really a good feeling. You want to be drawing more of your cheap stuff out of your shield zone with Local Motivator so you can continue to race and protect your life total. So I think it's just fine enough to have this low curve and draw cheap cards that you can use. It's good enough. You don't need to high roll on Shield Blast necessarily. But that said, you can do it sometimes and like just go for these Hail Mary plays where you just bank on having like a Bone Blades or Joko and shields. And yeah, I don't know. This deck's sneaky good. It's very good against like the nature decks, Mono Nature, Water Nature. It's pretty good against like Monolight. It goes kind of 50-50-ish with that deck, which is just being very similar and being able to combat things. That said, maybe a big part of that is just having this Gloomhollow Taskmaster, which outsizes stuff. But the other part of it is just like the resource grind. But yeah, if Monolight had bigger creatures, maybe that wouldn't stay the case. But yeah, that said, your deck lines up pretty well there. But again, has trouble versus Tendril Grass for sure, especially when you're not like a Keeper of Laws deck that can just play some stuff and have Keeper out, and then a lot of your stuff is just dying to Tendril, and then it kind of counteracts your sort of recursive engine and skirmish blockers as well. So stuff like Light Nature Haven are just really bad matchups for this deck. It also can struggle against like mid-rangey decks in the same way Monolight can, but it is sneaky good when they don't draw certain cards. Like if your control opponents don't draw certain subsets of their deck, this deck can be pretty fast. But it also does lean on these guys pretty hard. So yeah, if you don't see those on turn 2, your deck can be a little underwhelming. But then at the same time, you can have like crazy draws with Time Loss into like or Forsaken into Time Loss into Local Motivator or whatever, and then play a Screeching on 4, and you just have pretty interactive advantage draw. So deck is pretty fun to play as well. So one of my favorite decks, but can be very much like meta dependent. I think how good it is. I wouldn't feel really comfortable taking it to like a tournament, for example, online, because I think too many people play decks that just kind of maybe not great in a general setting, but yeah, that kind of counter this kind of deck. So you have to have like kind of a more specific meta you're targeting, and it takes like a kind of specific environment for this deck to really be shining. But I think overall still a fun quality deck that's enjoyable to play with. But yeah, I guess went a little more in depth on this one just because don't think I've profiled it in the past, but or maybe I talked about like an earlier version that my brother played in a tournament that I was working on a long time ago. But yeah, this is like the kind of revamp version that I've been testing a lot with. But yeah, that's Mono Dark. So here we got my take on a pretty classic deck, Light Water Nature Mega Bugs. I think this list does well to be like a pretty stock standard type list that just decent curve. You have a bunch of 2-drops, your 9 2-drops, you have Swordhorn, Manatake, and then I'm not super sold on this like 4-drop suite, 2 of each. I like our Psychic Predator, but then not playing 3 Rusalka Aqua Chasers or 3 Keeper Laws is kind of sketchy, but I don't know, the multi-sip count, 8 is pretty manageable. Maintain like a really high count of Mega Bugs for Manatake I think is good. Playing Ambush Scorpion over Manapod Beetle and Crickhand over Manapod Beetle as well. I think 2,000 power is really nice. If you have too many 1Ks, it can be a bit of a problem against certain cards like Drill Storm or even like people using Scrappy Punter, stuff like that. So I like the 2K power, and then Shield Blast off Pouncy Crickhand just works well when you have Anjac, which I think is a good card for this deck. Just a consistent sort of beater Evo that comes down, value card, helps you burst out damage. Just a pretty good card. And then it is well supported by the Manatake sort of engine and just having all these nature creatures. So I like Anjac as a kind of a complement to Hive Queen, as opposed to playing like a completely um, separate Evo line like Blinder Beetle Prime. But yeah, I think this deck overall pretty solid. There's no blockers in this list. Um, I mean, you could play stuff like Iron Will Tree. It's okay. There's stuff you can do, but I think I kind of prefer just playing without it and just committing to being this kind of more mid-rangey aggro deck that's good against, or trying to be good against other sort of tempo decks like this, other 3-color, more value, slower tempo aggros, and then also trying to be good against control in the process. So I kind of like that approach more than trying to cope and race against some of these more aggressive, stronger 1 to 2 color aggro decks that are low curve. You could like play stuff like Aqua Strider or Iron Will Tree to kind of hedge against those matchups, but I just don't really like that approach. Um, but it's definitely valid. But I think overall the numbers in this deck are pretty good. I like having the 6 Shield Blast, Piercing Judgment's really good. Um, yeah, just I think a good solid deck, good solid list, pretty consistent. It's just a matter of like maybe wanting to play the third Keeper of Laws. I think you could maybe come down on a Homunculon perhaps if you wanted to make that switch. I could see that actually just trim down one extra multi-sieve and go up on the Keeper of Laws count. That's definitely maybe the most viable change, I would say. I like the mana base here. I think having your 13 water cards for Cyberscamp on turn 2 is pretty important. That's a card you really want to make sure you're getting down on turn 2, especially on the play in matchups against like Sprout control decks, for example. It can be a pretty big deal to make sure you get that Cyberscamp on 2 on the play. On the draw, obviously you want to make sure you have it off of or coming out before stuff like Mesmerize as well. That's another big deal. But on the draw, obviously the standards for your mana base are a little bit lower, so you can maybe afford to go down to like 12 water cards or something. But yeah, I think on the play it's too nice to be able to have it in those control matchups. But I think overall just a pretty good solid list here that I think I would kind of recommend if you're looking to play bugs. But there's obviously a lot of different things you could do to tune it up. I think this is just a pretty kind of lean, standard, kind of stock type list that I think can be used as a general blueprint for a lot of things. But yeah, that's Megabugs. All right, so this here is my current take on Kurragar, which is a deck I profiled quite a while ago as well. There's a pretty in-depth video on going over exactly what this deck is trying to do, which doesn't really appear obvious to, I guess, many people, how it wins, which, I mean, to be honest, is not that often. But it's not the worst deck. It definitely works, but it definitely beats itself a lot, which is kind of the problem, and I've gone through a ton of iterations. I think the last tournament that I played in online, I used a version of this deck that I kind of threw together on the table shortly before with some half-baked ideas, and it was probably the worst deck I played in a tournament. It was just so poorly constructed and disjointed. But this build I think is a little bit back to the drawing board and made some changes, not anything hugely structural, but just tuned up some of the lists. I made a return to Aqua Strider, which I tried a lot of builds moving away from Aqua Strider and playing more of these like 1-drops instead. And then I decided instead to return to this approach of like maxing on Aqua Striders and then maxing Piercing Judgment as well, which is just a good card. And then the idea with Piercing, like it gives you more like board control options earlier with the Aqua Striders. And then on top of that, I mean, one of the things I was finding was just this kind of intuitive idea that I just wasn't playing enough multi-civs. Like the problem was I was getting these kind of bricky hands where there weren't enough multi-cards. And when you have like a big heavy control deck with a lot of cards in it, which this deck does, you just get a lot of really awkward, bizarre hands where when you don't have multi-civs to kind of cover two bases at once, you just draw way too many cards of one civilization. Then you get these light flooded hands with no water cards, and then you can't cast your reverberates and stuff like that, which was just losing me games. So I think there was this idea of just getting back to a bit higher of a multi-civ count, especially with light and water stuff. And then on top of that, just I trimmed a lot of the one of, so this deck is like down on a lot of these like one of toolbox cards, like stuff to answer Anjac, for example. Like I played Hovercraft Glurgle in the past. I played Spire Widow, Milporo. I think all those cards are actually pretty solid and fine in the right circumstances. Right now, this deck still has some weird one-ofs like the Toxic Fog, which Just gives you another kind of answer to nicks and stuff like that early on. But that was one of my kind of half-baked ideas before the last tournament. I played like 3 Coral, 3 Toxic Fogs, and was just like, I'm gonna answer Nix's and then have like a heavy Coral lineup with my root traps, and then it was just awful. Like playing Coral is just not a good card. And then that's something I've known for a while, and I keep telling myself and telling other people even, but then I just somehow like went against my own thought process and just like on a whim played a bunch of Corals, and it was absolutely awful. So just cutting back on that kind of stuff. And then I still have this like package of a few Root Traps and Sprite's Gift, a few Rothis and Blaze Helix, which I think you kind of need to beat some of these Haven decks. You need outs to it. And you could play like a different package of like Slayers and Storm Spark Blast, but it's a bit awkward to make everything work there. But yeah, I'm still kind of tuning and testing this deck. I think, I don't know, it works well for what it is still, I think, well enough. Of the list I've tried, I mean, in the gauntlet testing, it was kind of just a 50-50 deck that was pretty solid against everything. It didn't have any like super awful matchups, but then, or it was most awful. It had a few super awful matchups, but then for the most part, it was just kind of like 50-50 type stuff. Generally pretty good against like the linear Haven decks or stuff like that. Like these really slow, dirtily controls that don't have a lot of tools in them, like if they're 2 and 3 color Turbo Haven decks. But then bigger heavy controls can be pretty tough because they just have way too many different things going on in their deck that you have to answer. But I don't know, it's always been a work in progress, testing lots of different things. This build right now, I feel it's the best I felt about it in a while. I think the most cuttable card here is definitely Toxic Fog. Oh yeah, I also cut the one of Andromeda. I'm trying that. Like the Andromeda, stuff like the Milporo, Spire Widow. Those cards are kind of out of the deck right now, those kind of techie 1-ofs. And yeah, with the move back to Piercing Judgment, honestly, I don't really think the Toxic Fog is needed. But so that's definitely something you could change. And yeah, maybe just cut it all together. I think it's 54 cards right now. Maybe you need another recovery card. Maybe you need just another big thing like Andromeda. Maybe you need I don't know, another blocker. There's a lot of things you could try. Maybe a 1-of Logo Scan, or you could just cut the card and play 53. So yeah, I think overall the deck's been solid. It's pretty, I don't know, it's easy to underestimate it, but at the same time it is kind of just this finicky pile of cards that beats itself a lot. And then on top of that, like it's really easy to, I mean, I've tested a lot of different builds. I've tried cutting down to 50 cards a bunch, and those lists felt too light and they didn't have all the tools. This builds a bit more of the middle ground, and then I think definitely a better approach than some of the other things I've tried. Which is, I mean, good that I've tried it, but also kind of just some really heinous builds. But yeah, that's where I'm at with Coral Lock right now. I would kind of recommend this list as a starting place if you want to try it yourself, but yeah, that's the deck. So here we've got my trusty Light Nature Haven deck. Very simple, straightforward 43 card build right now that is just a bunch of ramp, a bunch of shield blasts, and then a bunch of big bomb haymaker cards. So this is a list. I think I profiled this one a long time ago as well, played it in a tournament. Some other people have also been playing it, a similar version recently in some of the online events as well, taking this list and trimming a few cards. But yeah, this is what I've had built for a while. I think the list I profiled before, the main difference was probably, I think Arbiter was in the deck at that point, and I've switched around some stuff, took those out. I think for Sumo Artichokes, I'm pretty sure it was just a direct swap there. But overall, I'm pretty happy with the list. It's just pretty clean, linear, as I mentioned, and then you just sort of ramp up and then go over the top. It has some weaknesses, though. Obviously, you line up kind of poorly against Cyberscamp and Keeper of Laws at times, which are problematic cards, but a lot of the tempo, slower decks that play around those cards, I mean, so a lot of the time they actually don't draw those cards, right? And then the game can be pretty easy. When they do, you can fight through it. You just kind of ramp and then go for it a lot of the time. I don't know. It just works out. The deck is pretty good, pretty solid, pretty consistent. The only problem is sometimes not having access to stuff like sweeper spells, like the Absolute Dark or Absolute Fire spells. Those kinds of board sweepers can be really big draws to playing linear versions of 3-color builds, I think. Also getting access to maybe playing Awakens or other top end stuff, or more hard removal instead of the sort of dies to mana kind of removal like Tendril Grasp and Root Trap. But I think still just keeping it clean and lean is pretty nice. The 2 Lyras, I think the old build maybe had 3 at that point. And I've just kind of, I'm not going to lie, part of the reason is because I think I have like a non-full playset of Lyras. Like I think I have like 3 in one deck, 3 in another deck, and then I had 2 left over. And then this was the deck that got the 2. So that might be a non-zero factor why it's there. But for a while I was playing 43 cards with the 1 Mana Storm and the 3 Lyras. And then I decided to just add this 1-of bottle. And a little bit after that, I cut back down from 44 to 43 cards by just shaving out a Lyra. I think the bottle, it looks weird. Some people made fun of it. I don't know. I think it's probably worth it. Like the card is just kind of nutty as a Shield Blast, just free wins. It's not, it's kind of hard to turn that down. Obviously it's a dead top deck, but like we're playing a crap ton of ramp, and like there's a lot of cards that are kind of dead top decks. Like you make concessions for stuff that comes up in timely fashion and wins games, and this card can very much do that. And pretty much every card in the deck is a good hit for the most part. Like they're either stuff that's already Shield Blast, like the Sprouts and Energize, which are like already cards that you're happy to see in Shields early, especially. And then there's or even more powerful version of those effects with Mana Storm, Helix, Reap and Sow, or it's other powerful cards that are already Shield Blast, or it's blockers, or it's just big stuff that wins the game on the spot a lot of the time. So I think Bottle is just a pretty good card in this deck. Just obviously it makes sense. It's a lean deck with a bunch of giant 9+ mana cards. So to me that makes sense, and I feel like it's been good. Obviously, like the biggest downside or risk for it is, your opponent pokes with like their scamps or their laws. You break the bottle, you play it and gamble, and you hit one of these low impact spells, and then they get to draw 2 cards or play 2 scamps or whatever. That's kind of a feel bad moment, but you take the gamble in those spots against those cards where, those you already might be a slight underdog in some of those games or playing those cards, and then you take the risk of just like hitting a Haven and winning on the spot. So I think it's worth it. And yeah, card is pretty good. It's banned. It was banned. It was restricted for a reason. And then I think the rest of the list is pretty clean. The biggest things I've been thinking about and stuff I've tried at times is trying to move towards a more creature focused ramp package. Like I think Drifting Toadstool is a card that I think has a lot of appeal as another 2 mana card, because this deck is light on 2 mana plays. Like you have obviously the tree, you have Sprout, and that's pretty much it. So having another card to ramp into 4, and then maybe you could complement that with a card like Bronze Arm Tribe as like another 4 mana creature play, and then that creature package kind of insulates you better. Like Toadstool itself is a really good card to play against Cyberscan, for example. The problem is the more you lean into creatures, the worse you get against dragons. Like you have these ramp spells or ramp cards that are liabilities against Herald of Infernus, which is a big issue. So there's kind of a balance there that's tricky, and this deck's matchup against dragons, depending on the build, can be anywhere from like very good to like probably 50-50-ish. Maybe some builds slightly unfavored. I could see that as well, depending on how tempo focused they are, how many bricks they play for like aggro matchups. But I think against like traditional Oath builds, this deck is like a slight favorite, or a decent favorite. But yeah, aside from like switching over the ramp package, there's like more card advantage-y stuff, mid-rangey stuff. You could play like Blade Seer as a card I've always wanted to make room for, but I can never I always had it like sleeved up in builds and then just couldn't justify keeping it in the deck. And then you could also even add like some more top end, like a 1-of Kurragar could just randomly be something fine as like an extra top end thing, or you could play like an Orion, which is obviously pretty cool. It's another big tap effect that also threatens to summon out a bunch of creatures. I think Orion's pretty solid. Even Eternal Gaia Dragon is like a random option, but I think most of these cards are just like, I haven't felt the need to include that type of stuff, honestly. But maybe those kinds of cards are worth it. Just to have a little bit more of the big top end stuff, but and to like help you against other greedy matchups where you maybe need a little bit more oomph. But I think for the most part the deck's been pretty good, and I'm fairly happy with it. But I don't know, maybe it has been a little bit weaker It felt a little bit weaker recently. I think it definitely has some problems. I wouldn't claim to say this is like a super amazing deck. I don't think it's like the best Haven deck or anything like that. I don't know if it was. Yeah, I don't know. It's been a solid like benchmark type deck for me, but I definitely don't think it's like a meta top end deck necessarily. But I don't know. It's been solid. All right, so here we have my current sleeved up list of Lightwater Fire Oath Dragons, which I mean is a deck that has been around for a while in the Discord server, especially. I think I kind of put a sort of configuration on the map. Obviously, Oathsworn was not like a new thing to dragons. I think it's been used in the past, but I think this like particular kind of configuration was something I sort of came up with in one of the first Discord tournaments I played in, and then a lot of other people have played like similar sort of configurations in the past with like the typical like kind of tempo core, and then obviously I've made some other changes. Like I think some of the early lists I was still playing General Sky Crusher, which I'm not as big of a fan of anymore, and I've just been like playing the Maelstrom just because I feel like Maelstrom is pretty good in most of the matchups against like these lower curve aggro decks where you just need this Maelstrom to push your Herald through. Um, Without it, it's because I mean I don't know. You're kind of trying to play this more combo deck against like other against aggro decks, and like these evolutions just kind of a lot of decks are trying to play this evolution game against you, and then just Lyra is just insane. Lyra plus Twin Cannon with just like Oathsworn Call or like Herald stealing the game. I just feel like Twin Cannon is much more like cost effective and relevant to come out early, whereas General Skycrusher I think is still a good card. I just think it's way more of like a mid range fight card, and honestly that makes it like pretty solid in the mirror match. But I feel like most of the mirror just comes down to like who just draws like better in the early game. Like if someone just draws their birds and like has answers for birds, I don't know. It's just the mirror is kind of a crapshoot, anyways. And it's like I feel like Sky Crusher is good in the games where both people probably draw mediocre, and then it's just like a big mid range thing on board that kills a bird and picks like it's a pretty strong card in those matchups. And then on top of that, it's also where it's also really strong is in matchups that are already like pretty favorable for dragons, which is why I'm not like super into the card. Um, so like if you go against like Lightwater Dark tempos or Lightwater Nature tempos, like these decks are decks you're already really good against anyways. So like playing this slower mid-range big dragon to me is it's not really my cup of tea. I prefer this like more leaner, lower curve. Just play like the cost-effective cheap dragons like Hyperspeed and Twin Cannon. Play a higher count of those, and then that kind of facilitates more of this like tempo game plan against other matchups. And then also has you playing this more like combo-y style against aggro matchups. And then I've been on 3 Awaken for a while as well, only 2 Andromeda. Personally, I'm just a big fan of Awaken. It's an insane card to cheat out in a lot of matchups. Just wins the game on the spot against control. It's just giant and huge, and then it's also a red card, which is really nice for the mana base, um, as opposed to like just playing a bunch of light dragons. I'm also not really a fan of a lot of the other stuff that's like Varaka, Krogon, or whatever. Like a lot of there's so many like other 9, 10, even 11 mana, 8 mana dragons that are like viable and playable, and you can play them and they can do good stuff sometimes and win some games sometimes. But I prefer just playing the cheap stuff and then the really big stuff. And I don't really like to mess around with a lot of that like in between kind of solid dragons, but I just don't think they're like wins above replacement type stuff is like really doing that much. I don't know. I think Cassiopeia is like the one card if you really want to hedge. I think that's for like Haven matchups, and that's I think one of the main problems with this list. This list is pretty close to what I've been playing for a while. Um, and like my gauntlet testing as well, I think was pretty much this list. Maybe 1 or 2 cards. Like I've been playing within like 2 or 3 cards of this list for quite a while. I think Dark Center also played a tournament online with this list and won it with a deck that was 1 card or 2 cards different. I think he cut the bottle of witches entirely, which I'm kind of hesitant to do. And then his other thing was cutting the jump jets, which I think is fine when you're playing Oath. You don't necessarily need both. You need one of these tools, Oath or jump jets, in your dragon deck to compete, I think, against a lot of these matchups. But and just push your Herald through. But I think jump jets is kind of bricky when you're already playing 3 Oathsworn calls. But I'm honestly just not that big of a fan of Coral. I think it's a little mediocre. It can obviously steal some games and be solid. It's kind of curve filler. Similar to Logo Scan, this is another card. It could be cut. I don't know. Crystal Memory is an option, and then you maybe want to fit back in Jump Jets as just like a good shield blast to set up some of these combo potential if you want to lean into that direction. But I think Logo is just gassing you up, giving you a little bit of card advantage, helping smooth out some draws is pretty valuable. So I've been liking the logos. I don't know. It's kind of, you can super heavily tune dragons. I think the main thing, I'm just like really attached to playing 3 keeper. I just think it shores up a lot of the tougher matchups, and like dragons can struggle a lot against control. This build, especially when you're playing 3-0s. So I don't know. I feel like the need to play keeper is strong, and I think that was one of the main differences when I was testing with Darksider's little list without bottle, and I think he had second Storm Spark, which is the other thing, and I wanted to cut Coral for the Keeper of Laws, and that kind of made me feel like for the water mana I needed to fit back in the Bottle of Wishes and drop one of the Storm Sparks. And I don't know, to me that makes sense. Like Storm Sparks are really nice, especially if you're leaning into Coral harder, because you want that kind of mix up dynamic between Oathsworn Call and Storm Sparks to give your opponents like these awkward incentives where Storm Spark they want to try and force out early. Oathsworn they probably want to save for as late as possible a lot of the time, unless you're on like no cards in hand for whatever reason. But yeah, so that kind of mix up is nice. But on top of that, I mean, Storm Spark, honestly, just only playing one has been kind of a greedy little decision I've been making for a while. Honestly, you probably need more of these like tap all effects, like either one of Cassiopeia or probably just the second Storm Spark. You just kind of need that stuff to push through Havens or blocker boards and stuff like that. It's probably not correct to only have the one Storm Spark if I'm going to be honest. So maybe I would trim one of these red dragons or maybe a logo scan or something, try to move around the numbers. Maybe you do just have to cut down on the Keeper of Laws. But then those are both cards you're kind of playing for the control matchup. And honestly, I'd rather have the third Keeper than like the second Storm Spark, because I'd rather just be getting into the late game in a really good position more often than not, as opposed to like having a card for when I'm in the late game in a decent enough position that I'm not completely dead and I have outs. So I don't know. There's a lot of debate there, but I think second Storm Spark is probably the closest card to being in this list. But you got to keep the water count high. It's a lot. There's a lot of things you're trying to manage, but I think cutting Jump Jets I think was probably a good idea, just because I mean Hyperspeed is just a really strong threat card. It's a really good card. I don't know. I think Jump Jets, being a break. I don't know. Yeah, I think it's solid. Jump Jets can steal games, but Hyperspeed is just a pretty good card on its own. So yeah, that's the list. Pretty solid, pretty standard for what I've had for quite a while now. But yeah, lots of things you can change. So I figured I should show off a rush deck. Now this is Fire Light Rush, obviously, and I don't know. I don't feel super strongly about this list or this deck in general. I don't think it's great. I just figured I'd show it off because I should show like some kind of rush deck, and this was the sort of best performing of all the different like fire rush decks and a lot of my like internal kind of testing like stuff and my playing online. This has been sort of the best rush deck compared to like my mono fire decks or Fire Dark Taxtra decks or other sort of stuff. This has just been the sort of most successful, and I don't know, it's pretty straightforward, pretty simple, just 1-drops, 2-drops, and a lot of fast attack stuff, and then a little bit of Storm Spark for reach. Just a very clean list. I really like Keeper of Laws. I like just playing all the stuff, common missiles, and then I don't know. It's just very straightforward. I think I profiled the list of this deck a while ago on the channel, and I don't think it was too different. It might have just had like, I think the one issue was that it probably had too much blocker removal, and I can't remember if I was playing Blinder Beetle Primes at that point or not, but I think I was on like Ashen Tributes, and then maybe not enough light cards, and then maybe only like one Blinder Beetle, and I've just kind of switched it around a bit, and then I just play the good stuff, with the exception of maybe Lava Racer, which is not the best card. It was a card I kind of threw in to test, because obviously it was a Vortex card, and when I was sort of revisiting the game, I wanted to test more new stuff that I hadn't played much with, and I put it in the deck, and I kind of just left it in the whole time. I never felt that badly about it. It's not an amazing card, but I don't know, the way you play this deck, it just does its job, and it's good enough, I think. But yeah, I just like what it does, and I think it's really clean and simple. But this kind of rush deck, I don't know, it's just not very well positioning Kaijudo overall, so I think it leans to just being not a very good deck. But as rush decks go, I mean, I played a bunch with Draco Mech Commander, like these flashier builds, and both my own that I've built and experimented with, and then other people's builds, and I've just never really taken to the card in a way that I think is like it's like necessarily the right way to build Firelight. Not that I necessarily would say that this is the right way, but it's the build that I've felt the best about from what I've tested. And yeah, these Draco Mech builds I just haven't felt that good about. I think they have their places where they're probably better, and then a lot of places where they're just weaker and then worse and clunkier. But again, this deck's not very good to begin with, so maybe I don't know, just trying to play like a more flashy or high roll card like that, and like maybe that's what you need to do. But I don't know. I just think that card's more polarizing at the end of the day, and I guess that polarity is what you need to win games. But I don't think it gives you like a higher average win rate necessarily. But maybe you need that polarity to win games at all versus certain meta contending decks. So maybe that's the kind of trade-off. I don't know. I don't feel good about Draco Mech Commander from what I've played of my builds and other people's builds. I've just never been particularly impressed, but it's not bad. And I think this list is also not bad, but not great. So I don't know. Try it out if you want. I don't know. It's a mediocre deck to begin with. Rush is just not a great strategy into a lot of the meta. So yeah, but I don't know. I like this no Evo, just clean, more Duel Master style, just a lot of fast attacks, removal. Unfortunately, Stormspark Blast is a necessary evil. I think you gotta play it. Just wins too many games, steals games that you otherwise wouldn't be able to. You need something like that in the deck, because a lot of the game plan is just play your opponent to get them to one shield, maybe two shields, probably ideally one shield. Sometimes in a great scenario it's zero shields, but one shield, and then you just sit with a couple fast attacks in hand, and then just if they ever try to kill you, you just usually pick up the ability to go double speed attacker and then just kill them. So that's kind of the game plan. Like, just some percentage of the time you get them dead before they can do anything. A lot of the time you get them to one shield and then they stabilize, and then you try to kill them with Stormspark unless they can stall the game out and like play stuff like Andromeda, which is most decks. So yeah, that's kind of how it goes. But yeah, it's Firelight Rush. All right, so here we have my currently sleeved up list of Water, Fire, Nature Veggies. Now this is a deck and list in specific that I don't have like a ton of confidence in. I can't really say this is what I'd necessarily recommend, but this is what I've been trying out recently. And honestly, this list has kind of come back a lot to a list very similar to LED's original list that I worked off of way back in the day. I think it's only 5 card difference, which is the 2 Lava Bursts and 3 Finbars he had. I think right now I just have 3 Tendril Grasps, the 3rd Swift, and the 3rd Turnip. But like I mentioned, I don't have a ton of confidence in this current configuration. I'm still trying stuff out. But over the years, I've tried a ton of different stuff like Sprite's Gift. Obviously, Darksteiner as well has been testing a lot of different versions of Water, Fire, Nature Regen, dropping a lot of the veggie stuff, playing out stuff like trying all sorts of different card selection stuff like Logo Scan, Thought Collective to try to find your bad apples, playing Sprite's Gift himself, playing Mana Storms, all sorts of different stuff, trying it out. Personally, I still like the veggie package. I think it gives you a level of power that you kind of need. But yeah, the main things I was doing initially was I kind of dropped the Seneschals from a lot of lists and then was trying out more Shield Blast. I think Tendril Grasp in specific, I think I'm a really big fan of. You could also play Root Traps, but Tendril has like a lot of synergy with the deck itself, hitting your own stuff sometimes, which is nice. Also deals with like wide boards of blockers and just gets stuff out of the way, whereas Root Trap can answer stuff like Awakened and other big things. But I'm personally kind of fond of Tendril Grasp in the general sense. But both are totally fine. But yeah, honestly, moving back towards Seneschal was kind of the idea with, and moving away from Finbar with this current list, because I needed to make space, and Seneschal was a kind of ancillary card that I was cutting, and just sticking with this like kind of beat down Finbar plan. But the problem is Finbar was mostly a card that was like good if you were, I think that was kind of the idea. It's like good if you're already drawing your bad apples and stuff, and if you're sort of doing good stuff already. Now it was like a payoff for having that, whereas, but I think like the idea was like with the Field Marshal and the Swift Regens, you already have your payoffs enough of the time, and so moving back towards Seneschal gives you a little bit more of a floor. It plays better with Swift Regeneration a lot of the time. That said, missing the bounce effect from Finbar and having a little less interaction in general is kind of an issue, but yeah, this list, like I mentioned, it's a lot closer to the initial LED list, which speaks to some of the way he was building the decks initially being pretty good. Lava Burst, I'm not really a fan of, to be honest. Like, the big strength, I think, honestly, is Herald of Infernus getting to out that card, at least if they don't have Lux. It also ramps you, but your ability to cast it quickly on curve is not super great, and it's kind of a, I don't know how much that is really that great of a plan to begin with. There's even niche stuff, like if your opponent knows you're playing Lava Burst and they don't want to risk their Herald dying because it's such an easy win card if they get it set up, they can just like play towards Oathworn Call or Jump Jets or something and set it up later. That's sometimes an option, but Lava Burst can be helpful there. Though I'm not sure how much that was really the intention of playing Lava Burst in the first place, considering that a lot of those lists were played for standard tournaments where Herald wasn't even legal to begin with. Not that Tendril was either, but yeah, I'm not a big fan of Lava Burst, honestly, but it's not awful. And then the only real indefensible thing about those initial lists was not playing 3 Swift Regeneration. I think, like, the card you just have to play 3 copies. It's kind of insane not to, but everything else, I think the move back towards Seneschal, just keeping the curve lower and seeing like Finbar as more of like a kind of expensive, unnecessary piece. I mean, maybe you could still find room for 1 or 2 or something, but I don't know. I've been kind of liking how this build feels and plays out a little bit more, and I do think the veggie stuff is kind of necessary. I don't know, the other builds that Darksigner has been playing a lot without the veggie package is, I don't know, they just don't really have the oomph. Like, it's, I think at one point he called it sort of maybe not win more, but training wheels or something along those lines. Like, you don't need it. Like, you can just find ways to win with like the more lean aspects of the deck, just your typical Blitz Commando and your small corrupted stuff. But I don't know. I think you do just kind of need the power level, and like this deck has like a much better matchup against like some of the Haven decks, for example. Whereas like the other version can be a little bit too underwhelming and then just fold to early blockers and then just dropping in Andromeda. This list can power through more things with Field Marshal. It just gives you a way higher ceiling. Ninja Pumpkin getting set up can just be a win condition in a lot of like other low curve aggro matchups. So I don't know, I'm just kind of partial to this list, and I think moving away from Finbar has felt pretty good, just to lower the curve, give you a higher floor with Seneschal. Seneschal comes in clutch late game off of regens as well. I don't know, I just feel like it's been a bit better, and that return to Seneschal. The big thing, like again, I was cutting Seneschals to try out different stuff, kind of committed to Finbar, but I think opting for Seneschal instead is probably better, honestly. But the rest of the stuff, I mean, I've tested a ton of different things. Like I mentioned, like a lot of different Shield Blasts, playing Sprite's Gift for a higher threat package, which was kind of the idea. I know Darksigner is still on the Sprite's Gifts, for example, just because he doesn't play the Field Marshal, so it's just more of a dedicated, committed Swift Regen deck. So you need to play like the 3 Sprite's Gifts because you're just digging with Ramp to find them, or digging with Seneschal to find them. And then, I don't know, I've tested also a number of different ratios of Blitz Commando and Steam Tank, just anywhere from like 2 and 2 to all sorts of 3-1 splits, up to the full 3 of each. I think all the numbers are kind of fine, kind of viable. But I don't know, I'm pretty happy with this list as it is, but I'm still testing it. Honestly, you could add a 3rd pumpkin, you could move away from 3 turnips. I don't know if you necessarily need those, but I kind of like them, just have more just low curve, good, solid stuff that guarantees you follow up with Bad Apple and stuff like that. Kind of a fan of those cards. But yeah, overall, I think the list is, I'm in a happier place with it than I've been in a while. So that's kind of what I got right now. So this here is a light dark Kalima list that I just cannot really recommend at all. I think this is just something I threw together from my initial 40 card build that I had played in my test gauntlet and just made some changes, and this is what I'm currently sleeved up and played a bit with. But honestly, like I said, I just can't recommend this list at all. Just very mediocre, I guess. Like, it's not the worst deck, but I don't really think a lot of the old Kalima builds are good at all either. But this build, I mean, you're more of like a light dark mid-range deck, and then I think honestly I've like constructed some light dark mid-rangey decks that just play like Scavenging Chimera instead and just use that as a payoff and actually just cut Kalima entirely. And I feel like those decks had a little more promise. And then just like lower curve mid-range deck, like topping out at Trox, maybe playing like an Agrix and a Serpens or something, but just like committing to Scavenging Chimera with just Lyras or something like that as like a splash. I think that's like a better approach and than actually playing Queen Kalima. And then on top of that, you can like mix it with some Self Mill, and then I think if Vang's legal, then that deck is actually quite decent. I think like actually a pretty good deck. But this deck is just trying to do that while still like maintaining the identity and payoff of just playing a bunch of dark cards by having Kalima in the list. I think a lot of my old lists had like was maxing out the Mark. I think Mark and Queen are just like really good for like dragon matchups and stuff like that, and these like other mid-range matches. But the card is like really slow and kind of just mana in every other matchup, and like against a lot of like the mono nature, water nature type matchups, you're just trying to build kind of build a little mid-range board and then just kill them, take advantage of their low defense, and just like play Trox, Lyra, and that's your kind of game plan with just like small creatures like your Gloom Hollows, build a board with those, and your discard creatures like Spire Puppet, and then pick off a few of their small creatures with Shred Mains and Screechings, and just do that kind of game plan. And then the Kalimas and everything else is for like the longer games. But yeah, this is just what I have sleeved up. I don't even know if Alphonsus is good. It's just there as like an Evo option, but card is generally just not very good. Yeah, I don't know. It's just kind of a mix, kind of a mess. But it's not the worst. It's not the worst deck, but I do like the just like light dark mid range aspect, and then the Kalimas are just in there, and they're not the worst. Have matchups where they're good, but yeah, the other approaches are just these like super pily Kalima decks that try to play this like really like threat based kind of grind game against controls where you just have like maybe you have Scavenging Chimera or other recursive engines, and you're just playing a really heavy deck like 50 plus cards, more so just for like the self mill aspect, just so you have like a bunch of resources in deck so that you can Kalima freely, and then just kind of go over the top of control decks just by having this insane resource grind. Like you kind of are the aggressor in that you're presenting threats like Agrix and scavenging, and you're like poking for shields, but then you just kind of outlast the control decks resources where they just can't like out your board. So that's like the other approach, but the problem is those decks just go way up on cards. Their average card quality just kind of goes down a lot, and then there's not a lot of card draw in those decks, or not really any card draw in those decks, so they become like really bricky, really reliant on your opponent just like making bad attacks and giving you resources for no reason. And then you just see your like really impactful discard cards less often when you build that approach. And I don't know, there's not a lot of good ways to build Queen Kalima, but it's usually not awful whatever way you go about it. But yeah, I don't know. I've been liking Trox a lot, and I think just playing Lyra in this deck is awesome. Just gives you that like low curve, mid range aspect, and I think yeah, if you played with I and Vang, then this kind of approach gets even better. And then I would just like cut the Kalima stuff entirely, find a way to play like a more scrappy, low curve, like bit of self mill, kind of maybe more Underworld Stalker, maybe play some Scavenging Chimeras and that kind of stuff with a little bit of self mill. But yeah, that's kind of the deck. Can't recommend it very much, but it's not the worst. Alright, so here I have the newest deck list that I've been working on for a while, or not that long actually, to be honest, but something I recently put together, and then I'm actually currently using this list in a online tournament that I think currently sitting in the winners finals, so just waiting to see if I get second or first. We'll see. Or no, in grand finals actually, whatever. Waiting to see who joins me, but yeah, this deck is pretty solid and obviously inspired by the Lightwater Cetus deck that I've been playing. Obviously this time I tried to push on exploring Panopter with just a way more heavy blocker lineup, and then just playing this small little darkness package for Agrix and Terra Pits, basically just effectively splashing Agrix, and then I threw in the one Serpents as well. This is basically like I think the first or second version that I threw together, or pretty much the first list. I just changed a couple cards that I had initially tested. I had like a Sasha in here, I had like a random Piercing Judgment in here, and I took those out for the Cassiopeia and the Serpents. So yeah, the main idea obviously is just it's almost like just a pure engine type deck. Like you just have nothing but birds, dragons, and Panopter stuff with a little bit of extra stuff, and even the spells. Like I borrowed this kind of thought collective crystal memory idea from the Coral Lock build to just make sure you find your Cetus or find your Panopter or whatever. And yeah, the deck actually performs pretty well, but I think it definitely has some issues. It's just light on actual interaction. It's not the best suited to deal with Haven decks. It's not very good, I think. Actually, I haven't really played the matchup at all yet, but against like Light Water Fire Oath Dragons or Herald decks, obviously leaning on Panopter is just really atrocious. So I could definitely see those matchups being pretty bad. It's very soft to Infernously Awaken to an extent as well. You just have like the 3 Terrapits to out it. Now Aggro can kind of help you play through Awakened, I guess, but yeah, the deck has some kind of issues, but in general, it's like pretty explosive and powerful when it does do stuff. Like Agrix is just insane. I've always been kind of on the idea, like if I'm gonna play a Panopter deck, I want to pair it with Agrix. It's just awesome to grind. Like if you play grindy matchups without too much unfair stuff going on from your opponent, I mean, just being able to go, like if they force to answer Panopter, then later you get up to Agrix, you summon blocker plus Panopter, draw a card. Late game, you have a Panopter out, you summon Agrix, summon back 4 blockers and draw 4 cards. Like you can just do some insane stuff. Then you have the normal just Cetus turbo draws with Cranky Leviathan to loop stuff. You can loop your Agrix, like you can summon Agrix, bring back Cranky, bounce some stuff back. You can just do a lot of insane things with this deck. Draw through most of your deck at times. And that was like an initial idea with Sasha, was you just draw through your whole deck and then you just have a huge hand, play Sasha, and just like kind of kill them safely, but obviously that's a little bit overkill. So yeah, I think the deck's been fine. I've even been able to take out some Haven decks if they don't play like too much discard. You can just, or any discard if they have some, it's probably going to be tough. But yeah, like you have Storm Spark Blast plus Agorix, you can set up some positions. Honestly, I had also made like a second version when I just threw this deck together. Again, like I pretty much threw this together instantly and then just had maybe 2 different one-ofs that I was just went for the round number 50 and just tried some stuff out. And then I pretty quickly also just threw together a different version that moved away from Panopter and was trying to be more like straight up Lightwater Darkness, playing Umbras as well. Umbra is a pretty nice appealing card for this deck too. Just because it gives you Slayer, which gives you more ways to clear Havens potentially with just your pairing it with Storm Spark Blast. But yeah, I think the deck is pretty fun, but again, it's just built to be as like kind of linear and one-dimensional as possible. And then that in itself is a way of being powerful, just because when you lean so hard on this linear axis, like you do just get wins out of your engine being really strong. But then the problem is you can also be exploited or taken advantage of when you don't have the ability to interact on certain angles. So it's like a blessing and a curse to be super linear and proactive in that way. But yeah, the deck's actually pretty good. It's pretty solid. Panopter has its moments where it's really nice, really good. Other moments where it's just kind of bad and mostly being charged as a multi-brick, which is not ideal. But yeah, you can have some really strong hands with this deck. You can also brick because you play 15 1 to 2 mana blockers. So it's got its issues, but I've been liking it so far. I think just a small splash of Agrix. Agrix is just insanely powerful. One of my favorite, probably my favorite Kaijudo card at this point. And then you have your normal stuff. But yeah, I've just been testing this list. I'm not sure how I would change it, honestly. Like I feel like everything has been kind of performing. It's just a matter of like finding that balance between, I don't know, trying to be like this consistency package with the crystal memories and thought collectives, and then I don't know, trying to find ways of squeaking in more interaction. I just don't know. Like I don't really want to play Mesmerize or these other like random cards. Like you could find room for a couple Spire Puppets. I'd probably play Spire Puppets if you want a little bit of discard, because you have Cranky Leviathan to reuse them. You can evolve on them with Cetus and then reuse both with Cranky Leviathan. Like I think that would be a big deal. I've thought about playing Dreadclaw as well, just so that you have ways of kind of getting more Agrixes in rotation, especially against like other control-y decks, where the big problem is you have ways of using Agrix to rebuy everything else in the deck, but not being able to recycle Aggrix itself means you can be kind of choked out on resources and lose a lot of your ceiling if they just discard your Aggrixes, or if you draw too many early and have to charge one, that can be a bit of an issue. So I think something like Dreadclaw, I would love if it was 6 mana, because then you just have this like insane resource loop. But yeah, something like that. I've thought of even like there's like a 5 mana Chimera multi-civ that gets a creature back from your graveyard. There's stuff like that. Obviously, Cloudworm would be a really easy, perfect addition for this kind of deck, but Eye of the Storm I'm not really using, so yeah, I don't know. I don't really want to play too much other interaction, but there is some balance there of finding ways to squeeze more in, probably, that you have to do. I don't really feel like you need to trim cards. But then again, part of that, or the reason you can get away with not trimming cards, is because you're leaning on these Thought Collectives and Crystal Memories. Because when you play this like deep draw deck with Panopters and blockers, and you're trying to loop Cetus and play it a bunch of times, your deck count is kind of a resource that you're taking advantage of there. And you're just trying to, a lot of your ceiling is tied on to just doing a ton of different stuff, and a ton of stuff just like cumulatively. And again, that deck count is a resource in and of itself to be able to do more and add to your ceiling. So I'm not super into cutting cards. I feel like the count is approachable, but again, like, it feels like if you want to make the deck less kind of linear and more interactive, you just take it to more of a mid-range place, and you probably have to drop one of these engines. And maybe that means like cutting the birds and just being a more fair kind of Dragon Aggrix deck with Cetus, and then lean into the Panopter side of things as your way of drawing cards, which is fair. Maybe that's worth it. You don't have these like high ceiling Cetus cranky plays anymore. You can't just like have these like weird dragon hands. But then because the deck is so high in cards, you don't always have these great dragon hands to begin with anyway. So you could just trim on birds, maybe even just cut Lux and just play Nyx. I don't know. Like, you can sit Nyx behind a bunch of blockers and then use that to just let your dragons draw cards, which is not bad. That's an option. But then Lux protecting Aggrix it's a pretty nice game as well. So I don't know. That's one of the ways. You probably have to cut one of those engines. You either trim down on some of these blockers and cut the Panopters, or you cut the birds if you want to make it more of an interactive, resilient deck. That said, maybe you could just find a way to trim some stuff. Maybe you trim like one Cranky Leviathan. Maybe you trim like 1 or 2 blockers, or maybe even a playset of these blockers. Find a way to do that and squeeze in some Spire Puppets. That's also a valid approach. But yeah, like I said, this is still kind of basic. Essentially the first iteration of the deck that I put together, and I'm still kind of testing it. And I haven't felt like super compelled to make changes, but I also haven't like really pressure focus tested it into the kind of hardest matchups. And I'm not sure, like, it could exist in a space where it's just like very good against a subset of matchups, like, but I don't know, maybe that's a fine place to be, like just very good against aggro decks. That said, like, aggro decks that play Stormspark Blast or ways of getting through your blockers can be problematic, like if they just have Tendril Grasp or something and then they get through to your shield zone, because if they don't have those, then those matchups are very easy a lot of the time, because the Panopter engine, you can just kind of beat them with that, and then Aggrix complementing that just gives you a really quick turnaround clock, plus the way to like I played a match in the tournament where I was kind of getting beat down. I had a mediocre draw early, and my opponent had just kind of gone wide and was able to do a bunch of stuff, but then you just slam the Aggrix, get back like 4 or 5 blockers at once, and that buys you a ton of time. Then you can untap and just like play a bunch of stuff in one turn and then just kill them with the Aggrix often. So I don't know. The deck is fun to play, powerful, lots of synergy, but yeah, you probably do need a little bit more flexibility and versatility going on to just make the deck a little more resilient. But maybe it's fair enough to just add stuff to make it more resilient. Maybe that's enough. Just double down on the engine aspect and just add a few ways of making the engine a little more resilient with some pieces. But yeah, you kind of are soft to like other dragon decks too, though, because you don't have like not playing piercing, not playing other like cheap tap effects. Again, like if your opponent plays a Nyx, there's not much you can do until you just play your Lyra. That's like one of the issues with this deck, is like your only ways of interacting with your opponent's board are like Lyris, Pits, Stormsparks, and Cassiopeia. So you're really just trying to high roll and like beat their engine with your engine. And it can be a little finicky, right? Doesn't always work. So again, finding a way to balance that is pretty tough, but probably doable. You just have to maybe kill the darlings a little bit. I don't know. The first thing I thought was just like move away from Panopter. It's got its places where it's good, and it's like one of the focal points of the deck, but maybe it's just not worth it. And there's a better way to build a light water dark Cetus Aggro kind of pile. Maybe it could have even just be a one of. But yeah, overall the deck's been pretty solid. I recommend like giving it a try and trying to tune it yourself if you're interested. But yeah, that's the light water dark Cetus Panopter Aggro deck. All right, so here we have my mono nature list right now. Obviously, there's some weird stuff going on with this deck. Pretty much just these three cards, honestly. Just the 2 Essence Elf and Stormspark Blast are random random inclusions that I've been testing lately. But yeah, for the most part, I'm pretty happy with... Actually, I guess you could lump these 6 cards, but I'm pretty happy with most of this deck, and I have been for a while. I think Prickleback, Chief Many Tribes, these have been cards that I've talked about in profiles in the past. I think Many Tribes is an awesome inclusion to this deck. Drifting Toadstool, I don't know if I ever talked about this in a video, but there were videos earlier where I didn't have this card in the deck, and then I eventually found it, put it in the deck, and I thought it was amazing. I think these are all like must plays. Hatchery and SunClan, I love SunClan. I don't know why this card got hate back in the day. It's just awesome for the deck. Hatchery's broken. And then Broodmother, I think, is amazing. One of the big strengths of this deck. Gigglehorn Charger is a supplementary card. I've always liked having at least a 1 copy. I think it just gives you a little bit of redundancy on the Broodmother, which is such an awesome card, and you're trying to go like 3 into 4 mana. Or 3 mana, turn 3, and then play a 5-drop on turn 4. So yeah, I think Gigglehorn Charger is just good. You can play anywhere from like 1, 2, maybe even 3 copies. I don't think I've played much with 3 copies, but I played from anywhere from like 0 to 2 pretty frequently. But I like having at least a 1. And then I'm pretty sold on the evolution lineup. Just play 3 of everything. I think 3 Boulder Fist is too good. Then Sumo Artichokes, just a great Shield Blast. Obviously right now I have like Savage Spawn in the deck, which I'm kind of attached to for similar reasons as Water Nature. I think just hitting the Clash is insane. Obviously this list is built more with a 2-drop focus than like some of the original champs winning list from Standard, which had a lot more 3-drops. With Many Tribes, you are kind of just trying to do a like 2-drop on turn 2 into 3 mana Hatchery plus like Many Tribes or sequences like that, as opposed to more of the alternative version, which is kind of just playing 3-drop on 3 and then Hatchery plus another 3-drop on turn 4. This deck you're trying to do more of like Broodmothers early and stuff like that. By way of Prickleback or just Chief Many Tribes or Toadstool, all sorts of different opening curves that give you more explosive avenues and a little more ramp as well, which helps you drop Boulder Fist way earlier, which is really powerful. But Savage Spawn is just a really good 2-drop that you're fine to play on turn 2, and then you can potentially attack with and get a Clash. It's pretty good for that, and I wanted something that had a little more size to it that I was just like comfortable tapping out for on turn 2. So it's just a really great card for that. Other options are like Pouncing Cricant, which I think is good to have another Shield Blast, which this deck probably could use to benefit. I think more Shield Blast is kind of the way that would be nice, but Cricant, I just don't like having too many 1Ks, and I think Toadstool and Many Tribes are just too good not to play. Same with SunClan Tortoise, so that's a bit of an issue. So I like the Savage Spawn. I don't really like Jackalax too much or these other 2-drops, but there's a ton of viable options. And then obviously right now I'm testing Essence Elf. It was just an idea to get a little more size, but it obviously is a 1K itself, which is kind of an issue, but just getting your Savage Spawn up to 3,000 power early can be pretty nice at attacking over or through things. The card is just kind of sneaky good in situations where you're like attacking with Rollcore to get 1,000 power on some stuff. It's come up a bit in like aggro mirrors and matches, even getting Sumo Artichoke up to 4,000 power in some of these aggro matchups can actually be really clutch at stopping a bunch of attacks. So Essence Elf's been fine, and again, part of that was just wanting a high 2-drop count for more of like this guy into Hatchery plus Many Tribes, or Essence Elf into Hatchery plus Many Tribes, just having a bit more of a 2-drop count, because I was playing Mucktax for a long time, or Tricky Turnips, or all these other options. But right now, like, I think I played this card in a tournament online when I last played this deck, and I was just trying out Essence Elves. I'm not super sold on it. I don't think you need it. Like, this is totally cuttable. I think you do need at least like the Savage Spawns to be 2-drops for the Hatchery package, but like I said, these 3 cards are mostly the flex slots, I think this Gigahorn Charger is also technically, I would lump it in as a flex slot as well, but I think you do need a little bit more of the value cards, and I think this is probably the best value card. I think it's better than Muktak, and I would be kind of inclined, like a lot of lists I play like 2 Gigahorns and like 2 other random 3 drops, or maybe an extra Horn Chameleon as a 1 drop. There's all sorts of other options. Obviously right now I have like the 1 Storm Spark Blast. I was considering even just like switching these to Storm Sparks as well and playing the full 3, just because I wanted to test out the deck with a little more defense. I felt like it was a little bit too slow and getting exploited by other aggro decks, just not having Storm Sparks. And obviously when you have 3 Storm Sparks, it gives you ways to even cast them and break through blocker walls, although you already have 3 Boulder Fists, so you don't really need to do that as much. But just give you, again, the reach of Storm Spark provides, the survivability that it provides. It was just like the kind of best splash that I was kind of looking for to buy an extra turn and try to be explosive and kill the opponent. Obviously the downside is it plays poorly with Broodmother, and then it's also just like a brick. But yeah, I was kind of thinking about playing more Storm Sparks and testing it at least at 3 copies, which I think I've done it in the past, maybe briefly. But yeah, I think those 3 slots I would consider the flex slots. Like maybe this, but I kind of am attached to that. And Savage Spawn is like pseudo flex in the sense that it needs to be a 2 drop, but could be anything. And then obviously I have like a bunch of other stuff. There's Ambush Scorpion. Manatech I think is actually really good. Like I've tried a build where I just completely reworked the early game, where I think I dropped, I think I felt like I needed to drop the Toadstool or the Prickleback, one of these kinds of cards. Toadstool is more individually strong. Prickleback plays, or for certain curves, it just opens up better curves on its own. Like in some matchups where you don't have like everything, Prickleback's better when you're playing it with Hatchery and stuff, but Toadstool just carries more draws solo. But yeah, this package you could play, if this was Eye of the Storm and Flutterbug, it would be more appealing, but you could play this package, cut down on maybe these 6 or the Toadstool and the Savage Spawn, and then you cut these for Manatix, and then Manatix playing it in addition to Sungline, it just gives you even more card advantage and ways to find the Broodmother. And then there's also like Dauntless Shaman, which was a classic. If your environment has more Slayers, you can play this card. I think it's a bit slow and unnecessary, but that was a card in the list. Jackalax option, Silver Fist. I don't know. I've never actually tried it. It's been in here because it's a Modern Nature deck, but in theory it just seems bad and unnecessary. Random Evolution. I think I tested this at one point. Wasn't really impressed. Third Essence stuff. The Muktax you could definitely play in this deck. I've tried it a lot. It's just like similar to Gigahorn. It's like an extra ancillary like advantage card. But I found like I'd rather just play the second Gigahorn most of the time. Like it's good. It's nice to have something that's kind of big. Like 3K can be nice against other aggro decks, or like halting them from attacking you sometimes. And then the card is just pretty solid at just like sitting there and milking value against slow, grindy mid-range matchups. But I kind of felt like those matchups where it's really doing that and it's good, those are the kind of matchups you can already kind of exploit and beat most often. Like it's good in your already good matchups. And I feel like Gigahorn is just a more generically strong version of that kind of value card. And it's nice to have Chilling in Mana to recycle and bring back Boulder Fist. But Muktak is a pretty solid fine card. I just feel like I'd rather play more 2-drops, or just play more Shield Blasts, or just play Gigahorn Charger instead. But I've played a lot with it. It's totally respectable, totally fine card. You can play Turnips as well, which gives you just more immovable bait. I feel like it's better if you just move away from this whole like more explosive early drop approach and then move towards this more like slower mid-rangey approach with just having your hatcheries and then trying to play like turnip on 3 plus like hatchery and then a 3-drop on turn 4. Like if you're trying to play the match a little bit more slowly, then turnip is good. But the problem is in open format, stuff like Tendril Grasp, when you try to play those more passive gameplays, like stuff like Tendril Grasp and Storm Sparks exists and all that sort of stuff. So I don't know. Turnip again is a totally fine defensible card. Horn Chameleon, I think I had a build with 3 of these at one point. Again, a totally viable card. My brother likes playing with this card a little more than I do. You can play it as an extra 1-drop. It just obviously, again, like I've been mentioning this whole time, like this deck is more of like a play hatchery on turn 3 and then do some explosive stuff with it on turn 4 type deck, or just get the value right away with many tribes, or just going wide with double 2-drop. But this deck is, again, when you're doing that, like you have the Horn Chameleon to play a 5-drop on 4, and when you have the Giga Horn Chargers, you want to do that a little more. It's also a Shield Blast, which is kind of nice, but the card is just a little bit underwhelming, and it was too much nothing when it felt like too much air in the deck when I had it at like 3 copies, which I've tested, but it's a fine one of as well if you want to put it into these 3 flex slots. Then this is just a random Shield Blast option. You could play, I don't know, Manatix and Pineapples were like good options. Barb Crusher I think is nice actually if you're thinking about playing Manatix. You can just throw this in the deck as like, so then you have some more 5-drop hits as just like an extra evolution. It gives you something more impactful to hit with Manatix. So you just have a bunch of 2-drops, Broodmother, and then like a random Barb Crusher. You can play Root Traps, could be good. And then, oh, these are like proxies for like Storm Spark and Arbiter, which are other options of like the splash, more impactful Shield Blasts. Maybe you could just play Root Traps instead of Storm Sparks, but if you want like an out to Awaken, as I always mention, but yeah, there's plenty of options. I'm pretty happy with most of the deck, like this whole package. It's just these 3 slots that I'm always playing around with. Most commonly, I'm playing like 2 Gigahorn Chargers and like usually like maybe a couple Turnips or a couple Muck-Tacs or a couple Essence Elves. It kind of depends on like the environment and or like what's going on, but maybe it would be best to just have 3 Shield Blasts and just kind of lean into that a little bit more. But yeah, that's the Mono Nature deck. Tons of options, and I think this deck is just really solid, really good. But yeah. All right, so this deck I wasn't planning to show off, but I figured I should because it was a tournament deck that I brought and won with a while back, and I don't think I ever talked about it, but it was this Fire Dark Nature kind of Kurragar creature combo deck. Kind of a meme deck that I put together. I think a while back I put together a Dark Nature version that was a little different, where I think I was like splashing Shade Blaze as a way of like comboing out a big board and giving it fast attack, and then I was also trying splashing like Squilla Scourge and trying to like use that to stun your opponent and then win your combo and then just kill them as well. Give you a way to play through your opponent and not die after your combo turn and stuff like that. And then at some point I realized like, oh, it's probably better to just like find ways to play more fire cards and then just play the Shield Blast and Awakens and stuff like that. So I went that approach as well, but I think I had posted the initial list in the Discord, and I'm not sure because it was kind of weird because I think Missing No and Louie in the Discord ended up building and working on their own list behind the scenes of Fire Dark Nature Kurragar. I don't think I had Darkseid in their initial list, but it had a lot of the same kind of stuff, and then me and Louie ended up bringing the same Fire Dark Nature Kurragar style deck to the tournament, and then we both ended up playing, and we played like 3 times that tournament, which was kind of crazy. But yeah, it was like pretty interesting, and it's a fun deck to play. It's not very good, I don't think, but yeah, this is a bunch of changes I've made in the last while though as well. Like I think I was playing with Eye of the Storm in that tournament where I had Vangs and Darkwood Tribes, which are both great cards for the deck. And then I went through a lot of changes lately, trying out a bunch of different stuff. The Shield Blast count's kind of hard to figure out, and I think Skulking Cypress was a card I was trying 3 of in lieu of Darkwood Tribe to try to have more ways of getting to 5 mana on turn 4, which was a big thing. But then I felt like I needed to go back to Goop Striker as just a more solid early play in more matchups. But I don't know, the deck's a bit of a finicky mess. Maybe you don't need to play the full 9 of these cards, but they're just so important for your deck to like even function coming out of the mid game, and find your Kurragars and such. And then obviously the main idea with this deck is that you're just this kind of combo deck where you eventually land Kurragar, and then you start like, you generate some mana, and then ideally you have like Obsidian Death out, and then you can start generating triggers, and then you kill your opponent's stuff, you kill your own stuff with like a Rothis comes out, maybe it kills one of their things and it kills itself, and you get 2 ramps, and you summon more stuff, and then you keep chaining through, and then ideally you can like summon an Agorix, get some stuff back, keep ramping with Darkseid's obviously like the insane part for getting to 9 mana fast, and then also being able to like combo like crazy on your turns. And then Shade Blaze is an interesting one as well, because you can order the triggers in a way where if you see something die early in your combo, you can leave the trigger from Shade Blaze pending, and then keep playing stuff off the top of your deck, like ramping with like Bronze Arm Tribe, ramp, summon another creature, and then when you finally fizzle out or want to end your kind of combo, you can just let the Shade Blaze trigger resolve and give everything speed attacker. So that's kind of the idea. But yeah, you just play a lot of big turns, and then you also have Awaken as just like a generic just bomb card that just comes out and locks people out, which was a big part of like that tournament matchups playing against like Louis' list. You just get a bunch of attackers on board and then just play Awaken, and you kind of just kill them because it shuts off like the whole deck. Obviously, you can play under Awaken to some extent with Kurragar and Aggro, but because it can summon creatures in a way that bypasses Awaken. But for the most part, like it shuts off all the shield triggers and stuff, so you just kind of kill your opponent. But yeah, I'm trying to figure out more ways of finding the ratios that feels nice, but I don't know. It's hard not to make this deck just feel like kind of like a high roll, fun deck. You need the right mix of like shield blast and big stuff, and then you need a pretty consistent ramp package, and then you kind of need to just high roll having your triggers and defense against aggro, and then very often doesn't work out that well. But Cypress, I'm not really sure. Maybe it's worth going back to 3 just to make the deck a little more consistent. But you have a bunch of Toadstool and Violet Puffers. So yeah, the deck's kind of hard to make work perfectly, and part of it is like you need a really big heavy deck to make your combo turns actually fun and make them actually work out well, because you need to ramp a ton and then also summon a ton of creatures. And then the more cards you have in deck, the more stuff you can do, the more likely you are to find a bunch of big, awesome creatures like these to keep your turns going and keep them exciting. But the deck can do some very powerful stuff. It's quite fun, but yeah, I'm not really sure how good it is or how good it can be. I haven't super tested it in like the gauntlet or anything like that, but yeah, I don't know. Artichoke I think is kind of nice just as a way. It kind of fizzles your combo turns sometimes, but unlike like these Jokos and Rothis, but the upside of Artichoke was it gave you a way to kind of survive like Storm Sparks or something when you have to make like an all-out push. It just gives you something you can put in tap that they're forced to attack, so it can actually steal you and save you some games, which it has done for me in some of the games I played online, which haven't been a ton. I think I played like the tournament and then maybe like another handful of matches, so that's like maybe 10 or 11 matches total. And I think I dropped like maybe two of those matches, so I've won a decent amount with it, but I don't think the matchups are too much of an indication, because I think I played like the tournament, for example, it was like double elimination, and 3 of the matches were against Louis, because we played in I think winners semis or winners finals, and then we rematched again in grands where I won both sets. And so that was like 3 matches against the same deck, and we're both playing like a big Kurragar combo pile. And then the other 3 matches, one of them was like against Oath Dragons, which is kind of real, and then the other 2 matches were against the same mono dark deck that I played in winners bracket and losers bracket that was just not very real of a deck. So like 5 out of the 6 matches were just like not not like good decks. It was just kind of a fight amongst a bunch of low tier stuff. But yeah, I think the deck overall fun, solid. It can steal games, it can win stuff, but it also just bricks a lot and does nothing sometimes, and can have some difficulty getting through havens, but can also go over the top of havens. It's kind of goofy, but yeah, solid deck. So I figured I'd show off and talk about a few other decks I had sleeved up, which is obviously this is Evo Fury Meta Blurple that I had sleeved up. I think I have 2 copies of this deck actually sleeved up to play mirror matches with, but yeah, just a very straightforward standard list, honestly. I think everything is like pretty much historically general to what people were playing. The only thing is like usually there was a few flex slots, maybe 2 to 4, but I mean, I'm still kind of like the Dark Scared Orbital, and I figured I'd just play 2 Neptis because I like playing with Neptis. Just a good solid card. But there's all sorts of different things you can try. I don't really have any strong takes on Evo Fury, to be honest, this meta or this format. Like, there's all sorts of stuff, like you'll play Chimera Tyrants, Return from Beyonds, um, Gigastands. Tekamora is a pretty strong big beater type option. You could play Gigazandas as more 2-drops, was something I had a thought of doing when I revisited the format. You could do all sorts of weird stuff. Even playing like Crystal Memories instead of Logo Scans, because I know some people like the idea of playing like Spy Mission instead of Logos because you can draw from your shields. But then I figure like Crystal Memory is probably just better at that for finding your evolutions and crack backing with that kind of effect. But then that was one of the things when I did first like kind of revisit and play some games of this format. I was thinking like, oh, tempo deck, I don't really want to play like Logo Scan. It's kind of like a slow, dirtly card. But then you play with it and realize like it's actually just an insane top deck a lot of the time, and being 3 mana is really good. Like It's actually just like easy to underrate how good this card was in back in the day in like these early formats. So I think Logo Scan is just, when you play with it, you realize like, yeah, it's in the deck for a reason. But I was kind of eager to kind of move away and cut that card. But yeah, so I like just playing with the standard list. I think like one of the other ways people made flex slots, I think CBH's list back in the days played like 2 Trader and 2 Neuron. To be honest, I don't really get it, just because like I feel like part of the idea back then was that people just played poorly with neurons, or they would just like aggressively send them and like do stuff like evolve on Seneschal for no reason with their neuron. And just because like people make bad plays with the cards, it doesn't mean like it itself is a bad card. Because when you play this deck, you realize like there's so many games where you're just like drawing towards Neuron or hoping to top deck a Neuron. You get your opponent to low shields and you want to just like all you're trying to do is draw Neuron. And having your 3 in your deck is like kind of needed to draw Neuron. So I just feel like it's too important, too good of a card to not play 3. And just because like people play kind of unnecessarily aggressive with it sometimes, or play it on creatures that they shouldn't be playing it on, or using it at times when they shouldn't be using it, just because that happens doesn't mean the card itself is bad. It's like, I don't know, the card's just like too good not to play 3 of, because you're always drawing to it and you want to top deck it and find it. So kind of like that. And then yeah, like I said, I don't have any strong takes on what's good. Like again, all sorts of random stuff like Ice Blades, Skull Shatter, even like all these cards can be played, but I think this list is just fun to use as like a very simple, straightforward, linear version. But yeah, cool deck, one of the classics. All right, so for this last deck here, I figured I'd show off a Rise format deck, which is a format that I played a lot with like several years ago. I played a lot with TKC, a bunch of matches with him, and then I ended up doing a lot of testing of like these old historic lists from like Earth Power Channel and CVH, what I could find. I dug up a lot of those old school lists for like Water Dark Fire and Hyperspeed Dragons and stuff like that, and tried out those against a lot of like more current brews and stuff that I had. And there were definitely some issues with those old lists, but at the same time, there were some things that some of them, like the Water Dark Fire list, hold up as like pretty solid decks, but they're a little bit awkward in their configuration sometimes. Like they're a little more of like this, I don't know, it shows you the different approaches that kind of work out, where you just have this like bit more weird mix of cards. You're less focused on like big threats and stuff, but then you have more blockers and more like random interaction. And then there's a bunch of like dead bricky cards that are just kind of not really worth playing that are in those decks that inflate the card count and then make the decks a little bit weaker. But yeah, some of those like Water Dark Fire just holds up as a solid deck for the most part. The other lists maybe not so much, but yeah, this deck is just kind of a thing that I threw together. It was one of my favorite cards, or 5 favorite decks to play with, but it is just like a very just kind of straightforward value mid-range deck that just goes over at least, or touches on a lot of the principles that I found in the format that I felt like were important, which were the main takeaway I had from playing, honestly, was just that Razorhide is a better card than Aqua Seneschal. Like that was one of the main takeaways that I had that kind of describes my feeling of the format. Just the format is very tempo based, and you want to poke for early damage, which is why Seneschal and Razorhide are so good. It's not necessarily because like, oh, these cards are good because they give you advantage, and then you can attack, and then oh, you get to attack without losing advantage. That's why the cards are good. It's more so why these cards feel so strong is because like attacking is already something you want to do, and now you get rewarded for it, right? Because otherwise, like if you think about it the other way, it's like, well, attacking is like not necessarily something I want to do. I don't want to have to attack, but at least I get this benefit for doing it, so it makes it worth doing. This way, it's like the right way to think about it is just like it's already something you want to be doing. You want to be poking for damage early, and now you get rewarded for it on top of that, and now it's even better. So that's kind of why these cards feel as strong as they do, in my opinion. And then Razorhide just getting up on mana and just slamming huge threats is just kind of where I want to be on the format. And then recognizing that like Heel Flame and Bolt Hail are just like the best threats in the format. Dark Scaradorable is in that group too. And then because of that, you just like I wanted to max out on like Terror Pits and Root Traps, just because like a Dark Scaradorable comes down and pokes a shield. You want to just like, the best case for you is that you just like hit one of these big effects, answer it, and now you can play your own Dark Scaradorable, or you can play your own bolt tail. Like their bolt tail comes down, crashes your shields. You just out it from your shields for free. Because again, it's just such a tempo-based format. You want to get up on mana, you want to slam your big things first, and then you want these like free answers to their big things. So I was like, that was kind of the direction I was leaning. Now, obviously, this deck is a bit clunky sometimes, and it's a little bit soft to like these weenie aggro decks, like rush decks, and that's where Barrage comes in. But the thing is, Barrage just kind of cooks so many of those decks on its own. Like it just gives you like free wins sometimes. So those decks are just not very good in the metagame, I think, because they lose to the Barrage. And then on top of that, a lot of like, there's always that layer of just like kind of bad decks that exist where they just play way more blockers than are really necessary, or they just play, I don't know, just all sorts of random configurations that are just like not very good in a general sense and kind of exploitable, but they just do counter these like weenie aggro strategies, these like kind of fragile aggro strategies. So if you just run into these kind of like blocker decks with like Great Arena or random like just decks playing, I don't know, just a bunch of like skirmish blockers, and like a lot of people try stuff with overcharge or do weird stuff like that, and then those kind of that mediocre tier of decks will just kind of take care of a lot of these aggro decks. But then the aggro decks could maybe come under and counter some of these like greedier mid-range style lists like Water Dark Fire to an extent. But then again, if people are playing these more old school looking Water Dark Fire controls that play a bunch of Refis and Frogzukas, like those are going to be bad matchups for the aggros. So like this deck is just kind of good against like the better decks, I would say, and then also good against the decks that counter the weenie aggro decks. Obviously, like there's some issues with just like you top deck a lot, and then like I think Toadstool was another card that I just wanted to put in everything after a while. Like figuring out that like this whole package, I love the ramp cards. Like Razorhide again, I felt like it was better than Seneschal. Bronze Arm Tribe, I felt like was like an actively great card. There's so many good 6-drops. And then Toadstool was just another amazing card that I think was like overlooked back in the day. And I just started putting that card in everything. It's great. Like, and then you just ramp up and then start slamming this stuff. You poke for shields early with Heal of Flame. Obviously, if you fall behind on tempo, that's part of the problem with this format, though, is it just becomes very variance-based, because you are just like banking a lot on like your shield blast for tempo, or you're just like poking shields back and forth. If you just brick early and fall behind, then it's hard to catch up. But yeah, just having the redundancy and consistency of threats, because like some of these other decks that I've tested, they just don't play enough threats, and then it's kind of just RNG. Like, oh, they actually found the one of Bolt Tail. Like playing one of Bolt Tail, like there's so many games you just win if you have it, and then only playing one, it was like, oh, they just never have it. So it's just kind of easy to win most of the time because they just don't have it. But yeah, Unchained's insane. Razor Kinder's awesome. Just another like these creatures that just come down, kill something, play through. Like I just felt like that. And then Gigahorn Charger just gives you something to play that fetches these things. It doesn't die to Bone Blades or Barrage. It's just a big card. Obviously, I actually took these out of the deck for, I think like I felt like I should show off the Gigahorn Chargers, but I recently did try taking them out just to play like a 1 Sprout and 1 Skeeter Swarmer, just because again, like one of the things that's nice about blockers and why you do kind of want them is not necessarily for the early game, although you will kind of play those sometimes. But like one of the big strengths of them is just that they kind of preemptively protect you from Bolt Tail. So like if you play this out later, then you can race them, attack their shields or whatever. And then if they want to crack back, or if they want to set up an attack, they have to like, again, these tempo races, like either you answer them with a Terror Pit from shields, or you just preemptively stop the damage by committing a blocker early, and that kind of blanks one Bolt Tail attack. So these tempo races with just huge threats, it's nice to have some cheap blockers. So I put in the Skeeter Swarmer, and then Sprout. You don't want to overload on the ramp because they are just like, you do just top deck, and then you're top decking too many bricks. But then I felt like maybe just one other like early game 2-drop card to accelerate could be pretty nice. And then Gigahorn Charger, it does curve awkwardly if you do draw your ramp. But if you have a slower hand that's like Gloom Hollow plus Heal of Flame, then you can play Gigahorn to search like Dark Scared Orbital or Unchained. It is just a good solid card, so I liked it, and that was kind of one of the original ideas, but I think lowering the curve a bit is pretty good. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about this deck just and go over some of the things that I found in the format. But again, it is tough because I do feel like this deck is like pretty good and good against a lot of the stuff that I tested in this format. And it holds up pretty well as well against like some of these old historic decks, kind of just has favored matchups. But the problem is like, again, as I was mentioning, there's a lot of like tempo RNG to this format where like you kind of just lose sometimes to like your opponent just having the threats, and then you don't have the shield blast, or they have like early heal of flame and you never find an answer, or stuff like that. Like obviously this deck is set up to like take care of their threats with 3 Razor Kinder puppets and then just have way more threats than they have answers. And if they're trying to play a grind you out game, then that just doesn't work. Like I think I tested some of those old foul control lists as well, or keeper controls with like the light water dark fires with a bunch of answers and trying to like recycle terrapits, but those decks are just way too slow. Like you have to be a proactive mid-range deck. You have to be playing these big proactive threats. I think you just can't play hard control. The only control decks that I felt like were actually good were these like turbo ramp decks. Like I tested some 4-civ and 3, even like Fire Dark Nature, where they were just like turbo ramp with like Mana Storms and Skull Shatters, and trying to like just play a bunch of that stuff, and then even trying like Mornas and Terra Dragons and just being like an even more rampy big stuff version of those decks. Just play a lot of the removal and discard, and I feel like those were like the more successful. And then there's almost kind of like this, those decks ended up being really really strong against like the Water Dark Fire decks that didn't play ramp, whereas you just get up to shatter and then just like turbo into shatter, and then they're on low mana and they can't do much, and then you just start playing big threats. But like these nature versions kind of countered those because you had enough early ramp to poke for shields, get up in mana, and then you can just start top decking threats when you get up in mana. So these lists were better, and then this list was also beating like the Water Dark Fire mid-range control stuff. And then the aggro decks could maybe get under this, and yeah, there was like kind of a lot of different stuff going on. I think the hyperspeed decks are solid as well. There's a lot of cool things in the format, but it is kind of just this like a bit of a high roll kind of stuff when, yeah, but I think this deck's pretty good in the format, and again shows off some of like the things I found, which is like wanting to play a bunch of these shield blasts. Obviously not having like Bone Blades and Tornado Flame is a bit of an issue in some matchups, but just like being the proactive, like just slamming big stuff is pretty fun. So yeah, figured I'd just talk about the format a little bit and show off this last deck that I had sleeved up.